One subject that seems to come up for discussion time and again in the world of rendering, and one that coincidentally also seems to generate a huge amount of confusion, is the topic of linear workflow. Now, whilst we are not in this video going to even attempt to cover this subject in any kind of depth, we do need very quickly to take a look at and discuss an option of the same name that can be found in the option editor's colour mapping rollout. We need to do this because despite its slightly misleading name, and despite the fact that the V-Ray for SketchUp help clearly states otherwise, many users do appear to have gotten it fixed in their minds that this is a checkbox that needs to be enabled if we want to make use of a linearized rendering workflow, which, simply put, is not true. What this checkbox does provide is a quick and easy way for users to apply an inverse gamma correction to all bitmap textures and colour swatches found inside any of the V-Ray materials that we may be using, something that can be both good and bad at the same time. To demonstrate what I mean by that, we have our start scene here, which is currently being textured by means of a single V-Ray material, one that has R, G and B values of 100, so essentially the material is just slightly darker than a mid-grey. The scene is also being lit by means of the default sun and sky system, with the SketchUp shadow settings providing a mid-afternoon setting on the 10th of July. We have a camera exposure in the scene that has been set to make use of the Sunny 16 rule, which, simply stated, says that in order to get a good exposure from a shot taken on a bright sunny day, all we need to do is set our aperture, or f-number, to a value of 16, and then set our shutter speed so that it is 1 over the film speed or ISO value that we are using. With an ISO of 100 then, our shutter speed would be set at 1/100th of a second. With an ISO of 200, it would be set at 1/200th of a second, and so we go on. With such a setup then, we may be a little bit surprised by what we get as I hit the render button. Rather than seeing an image that feels like it was taken on a bright sunny afternoon, what we get instead is something that instantly looks much more muted and subdued than it perhaps should. This is being caused by our linear workflow checkbox. Indeed, if I just uncheck that and then take a region render in the image, you can see that what we get now seems much closer to what we would expect from a shot taken on a bright summer's afternoon. The initial problem here was being caused by the fact that the diffuse colour in our material, with the linear workflow option enabled, was receiving an inverse gamma correction at render time, so a correction of 0.4545 recurring. The idea being that the lit areas of the material as seen in our final rendered image would match as closely as possible to the diffuse colour found in the material's colour swatch, thus matching what we see in the render to what we see in the SketchUp viewport. But of course, if we were to take something like a medium grey object out into bright direct sunlight and photograph it, it would not, at least not without some heavy post-production work, look like the same grey object as we were considering indoors. The upshot of this test being that, in my honest opinion, the linear workflow option really makes coloured materials in the scene behave in a very unrealistic manner. When it comes to using bitmaps in our materials, however, the situation changes somewhat. If I, for instance, double and then triple click on our outdoor floor geometry, and then go ahead and open up the SketchUp Materials browser, I can come into the Tile section, select the Tile_Ceramic_Multi option, and then using the Paint Bucket tool, apply that material to the floor geometry. If I now go ahead and take a render though, rather than looking just right with the linear workflow option turned off, the bitmap image on our floor actually looks really washed out, much more so than we would expect even on a bright, sunny afternoon. This is being caused by the fact that 8-bit or low dynamic range images, such as those being used in the SketchUp material library, already have gamma correction built into them. When we then add the extra 2.2 gamma correction that is being applied by means of V-Ray's colour mapping controls, what we get is a very washed out looking double gammaed bitmap texture. Fortunately for us, and especially so if we do use lots of 8-bit images such as PNGs, BMPs or TGAs in our materials, there is a handy solution ready and waiting for us, found again in the colour mapping controls. This comes in the form of the Correct LDR Textures option. Enabling this applies the same inverse gamma operation as does the linear workflow checkbox, but in this instance, and much more correctly in my opinion, it leaves the colours found in the material swatches alone and applies the gamma correction only to any low dynamic range images being used in the material. What we get if we take a render now has a much more natural look and feel to it.